Hello, beautiful warriors. It's me, Caitlin Parker. I know this is technically my second podcast, but I wanted my first real long podcast to be of my story battling pulmonary hypertension. This will include everything from the good to the bad with battling my disease. I want to go into great detail about everything, so grab a snack and a drink because this one's going to be a long one, considering we have 21 years to go through. Ha ha ha. Let's start from the very beginning, before I was officially diagnosed with PH. Now, to be honest, I don't remember anything from the time I was born until the time I was 8. All my memories I have of the following events are going to be from stories my mom or family members have told me. My mom used to tell me that even from a super young age, I would get out of breath far more easily than my peers. She would tell me I would spend countless hours at the hospital getting breathing treatments for, quotation marks, asthma attacks, because all the doctors thought I had severe asthma. But that was not surprising because my dad also has asthma, so the doctors just assumed that I had it too. And with that being said, that is all I can say about how my life was until the age of 8 when everything had changed. The date was October 6, 2008. I was going in for a routine checkup because, like I stated before, all the doctors thought I had asthma, so I needed to have regular checkups at the doctors. And as one of the doctors held a stethoscope to my chest, asking me to take deep breaths in and out for as long as she kept moving the stethoscope around my heart in different positions. The doctor then heard a slight murmur in the right side of my heart. I was then transferred to the hospital in Casper to do x-rays and an echo. All I can remember next was little Caitlin getting strapped down into a stretcher, unable to move, with an oxygen mask covering my nose. I was then getting life-flighted to Denver. I remember the helicopter landing and having several doctors rushing me into the hospital. It was a late night, so as soon as I got to the hospital room at the Children's Hospital in Denver, I was sound asleep from the long and scary day I have had. If only I had known that my life would be forever changed when I woke up the next day. I think I was in the hospital for at least a week getting all sorts of tests done. They were trying to figure out my diagnosis, and all I can remember was being in the hospital bed for several days, and each day different groups of my family members from both sides of my family coming to visit me and dropping me off gifts. The only gift I remember receiving was a stuffed animal I had named Catherine, who was a dog, and I would treasure that dog for many years. After all the tests were completed, my doctors, more specifically Dr. Dunby RV, who is also still my pulmonary hypertension doctor to this day, said, "Caitlin, we have figured out what is wrong with you. You have a rare chronic illness called pulmonary arterial hypertension." Now I'm going to read off the definition I have found on Google to you guys, explaining what pulmonary arterial hypertension is. PAH is one form of PH, and PAH, high blood pressure in the right side of the heart, results when blood vessels in your lungs have thickened and narrowed. Because of this, the right side of your heart has to pump harder to move your blood. Because the right side of your heart is working so hard to keep up with the blood flow, your heart becomes weak and over time may fail. When your heart is weak, it takes longer to move blood through the lungs to pick up oxygen, so your oxygen levels may become lower than normal. To summarize that in my own words, this is how I explain my disease to everyone. The left side of my heart is caved in a little bit, causing the right side of my heart to work harder to pump blood through my body, causing me to get out of breath super easy. These are the signs of pulmonary hypertension. There is shortness of breath, intentionally while exercising and eventually while at rest, fatigue, dizziness or fainting spells, chest pressure or pain, swelling in my ankles, legs, and eventually in your abdomen, bluish color to your lips, and racing pulse. Wow, lucky me, I'm currently experiencing all the symptoms of PH. I am labeled in the group 1 category of PAH, which is idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. And to sum that up for you, idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension is just a fancy way of saying my doctors don't know why I have this rare disease. In fact, it's so rare that there are fewer than 200,000 U.S. cases per year. These are the classes of pulmonary arterial hypertension. Class 1, the condition does not limit your physical activity. Class 2, the condition slightly limits your physical activity. Class 3, the condition significantly limits your physical activity. And Class 4, you are unable to carry out any type of physical activity without symptoms. Of course, when I was first diagnosed with PAH, I was in Class 1. Now, 13 years later, I am in Class 4. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's go back to when I was first diagnosed. Since I was class 1, which was the condition did not limit my physical activity, I was still running around participating in all the sports I wanted to play. Nothing stopped me. I was in elementary school, more specifically 3rd grade. My teacher was Mrs. Horkin, and let me tell you, she was more protective and scared of my disease than I was. When I was diagnosed with PAH, I was out of school for, I believe, for at least a few weeks. When I got back to school, there were a lot of letters from my classmates wishing me well and saying that they were glad I was back in school. Now, when I first got diagnosed with PAH, it was the beginning of October, but I stayed in the hospital for a few weeks. So when I came back to school, it was the beginning of November, and living in Wyoming winter was slowly coming. That meant I needed to spend the recess inside because when the weather was below 32 degrees, I could not be outside, and that is because when it's cold outside, it becomes very difficult for me to breathe. Since I was unable to go outside, my teacher allowed me to pick someone to stay in the classroom with me and play inside while everyone else was outside. I remember I would also try and pick a different classmate each day to keep things fair. It was funny because all the kids would beg me to choose them to stay inside because it was so cold that they did not want to play outside. With all that being said, looking back at my elementary days, nothing big changed in my life because for the most part I was normal, besides the fact that I couldn't go outside. But I was still play sports. I was still able to participate in PE class and keep up with the rest of my kids in class. When I was younger, the sports I played were volleyball, soccer, t-ball, and I even tried basketball. But unfortunately, I was only able to play one season, and that was in 5th grade. But to be fair, I wouldn't even consider me actually playing basketball because most of the time I would just be sitting on the bench. Funny story, I remember thinking all the players secretly hating me because all their faces would be so bright red and they would be breathing so heavily while having to keep playing because I could only play for about 2 minutes max because I was unable to breathe and needing to sit out. When I got into middle school, that's when I actually started noticing things change for me. For the first time, I was feeling different from my classmates. I would consider myself in the class 2 category of pulmonary hypertension, which was the condition slightly limits your physical activity. In 6th grade, I went to CY Middle School, and that's when everything slowly started to change. In PE class, I could no longer keep up with everyone else, and sometimes had to sit out during class because I could no longer do the sport they wanted us to play. Every day, I also had to leave my class early and go to the nurse and sit down in a chair and use oxygen for 30 minutes before school ended. Then the nurse would walk me to the bus before everyone else got out of school. It was funny because in 6th grade, I had considered the nurse to be my best friend. Now, I don't want to get all sad, but I'm pretty sure that was the first time dealing with depression. Oh, and speaking of oxygen, I forgot to mention that I had to sleep with oxygen during the night for, I believe, about 3 years. So from when the time I was 8 to the time I was 11. It's funny that going from the beginning, some memories just hit me and I'm like, oh my god, I totally forgot about that because I have been diagnosed with PH for 12 years. And of course I remember every detail from the last couple of years. But it's also harder for me to remember details from my earliest years because that was so long ago. So I apologize for skipping around a lot. I'm trying my best to remember everything, but it's really hard. Anyways, back to my story. 6th grade, I tried out for middle school swim team because I always loved the water, and I was at the point I completed all the levels of swim class. When I was a swimmer, I did the 50-meter backstroke because that was all my body could handle. During that time, I also did cheer and continued to play volleyball because that was my favorite sport. Fast forward to my 7th grade year, my family moved to Cody, so I went to Cody Middle School. During 7th grade, I got my period for the first time, and I know that's a little TMI, but I have to share this news because after that, at my next doctor's appointment, they asked if anything has changed, and I told them that I started my period, and with that, my world came crashing down for the second time. I got the talk, but it wasn't the talk you guys are thinking about. It was the talk of my doctors explaining that now since I had my first period, they needed to tell me something. They told me that I would never be able to have my own children. I can't have my own children because one of the medications I'm on will cause serious birth defects to my child. Now, I'm not going to go into so much detail about that because I think I'm going to have a separate podcast going deeper with my feelings toward that topic because right now I'm just highlighting events in my life to where I'm at now. I've been told from an early age that I won't be able to have my own kids. So as of right now, I don't think about it much, and it's also not that important to me. 7th and 8th grade weren't much different from each other. I no longer needed to wear oxygen at night, and I also no longer needed to go to the nurse's office and wear it for 30 minutes during the day. The only big thing that changed during that time was in PE class, because since my pH was progressing, I was no longer able to run anymore. And so with that, I did not have to run the mile like everyone else did. Yes, I was still required to do the mile, but I was able to walk it, and I was actually proud of myself for being able to walk the mile in less than 10 minutes. Then I also did not have to do the pacer anymore either, which was fine by me, because at that point, I was only able to run about 3 levels, which each level was a distance from one side of the gym to the other, so it was basically pointless for me to do. Then, of course, I started high school, and I could honestly probably do a full podcast of my experience with PH during high school, because that's when everything fell apart for me, and it only gotten worse from there. My freshman year, my doctors told me that I was no longer able to play competitive sports, so that meant I could no longer play volleyball, and I was devastated because volleyball was my favorite sport. But then that was when I took up 4-H shooting, because that was the only sport that I could really do, and I was very good at it. I was able to do 4-H shooting because there was really no physical exercise. I just stood in 4 different positions and shot. I shot a .22 and an air rifle, but that's not very important. My sophomore year was about the same, except I was also a football manager and continued to be a football manager all through high school. I was also a basketball manager for 2 years, but I didn't really like it, so I decided to stop. In high school, I was only required to take PE for 1 year, so I took it my freshman year with my friends, and then that was it. Yes, my pH was getting worse, but it still wasn't that bad. Then my junior year happened, and that's when everything bad started to happen in my life. The beginning of junior year, I needed to have a heart cath done, which was no big deal because I was required to have a heart cath done about every 4 years, just so that they could see the exact pressure in my lungs. I went to the children's hospital for a heart cath, and when I woke up from the heart cath, I just knew things were bad. I could tell because of my mom's face. I could see the sadness in her face, and I knew that something was not right. At that moment, I was laying in my hospital bed surrounded by my doctors, and that's when Dr. Ivy told me the bad news. He said, "Caitlin, your pressures in your heart has increased a lot, and your pulmonary hypertension has got a lot worse. Your medications are no longer working enough for you, and we need to put you on a sub-Q Remodulin." I didn't know how bad things were going to get, and if I did, trust me, I wouldn't have gone without medication. I'm just going to summarize what that part of my life was like, because I think I want to do a whole podcast on that topic. So back to the story. I got on sub-Q Remodulin, and at first it was fine, it was working, but then about 6 months after, my sites kept getting infected, and I would have to change my sites. It seemed like every other day. I was getting violently sick, throwing up constantly, having to stay home because I was so weak and I could barely get out of bed. And then that's when I tried to commit suicide. Now, don't freak out. I didn't try taking pills or put a gun to my head, but I was so severely depressed and was suffering every day. I thought that I could no longer take the pain and decided to stop taking my medication altogether. I took out the site and hid it from my parents for months. I also did not take my other medications. And if you're suffering from a chronic illness, that you know that that's basically a death wish. But I honestly really didn't care. I no longer wanted to live. I no longer had any joy in my life, and I wanted the suffering to stop. That's when one night my mom came home and found that both of my pumps in a hiding spot, and that's when she realized I wasn't taking my medication, because if I was, there would have only been one pump out, and I would have the other one. I came home from school that day, and she told me what she had found, and I just broke down. I told her everything, and that's when I had to call my doctors. I told them I was no longer doing the sub-Q Remodulin anymore, because to me it was not worth the pain and suffering I was going through. It took me a while to finally be okay again and to start taking my oral medication that I should have been taking all along. Once again, I know that was really dark, and I didn't want to go into too much detail about it, but I promise I will on another podcast. I'm just trying to summarize what my life has been like over the years with PH. Now, for more exciting things, my senior year of high school, I was granted my Make-A-Wish trip to Hawaii to swim with dolphins. It was a week trip, and my whole family got to go. So there is one thing positive about having an incurable disease, and that is, since you'll never get better, you are granted a wish. One wish. And my wish was to go to Hawaii and swim with dolphins. All expenses covered. It was the best time of my life, and at that time I was truly happy. It was something positive in my life that I could look forward to instead of just another doctor's appointment. Now, we're up to present day in my life, and everything has only gotten worse. I'm at the point of my PH journey where I honestly have no idea how much longer I'm going to live. A couple of months ago, I had my first fainting episode, and if you want to hear more details on that, you can go to my YouTube video titled The Time I Fainted at Work, and that goes into detail about everything. Then, the beginning of July, I also had another fainting episode and was hospitalized again. And instead of pretending like everything was fine, I had to go down to Denver and get heart surgery. They placed a small hole in my heart to help my heart pump blood through my body. Again, if you want to hear more details about that, you can go click on my YouTube video called Heart Surgery. I explain everything that happened in that video. Now, it's August 2021, and I'm not sure what to do with my life. Because I fainted, I have had the whole month of July off of work, and I'm honestly scared to go back to work. I now have a portable oxygen concentrator that I need to take with me everywhere. I now need oxygen a lot. Whenever I know I'm going to be walking or going to be in the heat or basically do anything, I put on my oxygen to help me breathe better. Does it totally help with me being out of breath? The answer is no. It's still hard for me to do anything. I get out of breath so easily that I can barely do anything. It's pathetic, really. I also now have to have a wheelchair, and I have been using that a lot lately. I use it when I know I'm going to an event that requires a lot of walking. At first, I was really embarrassed about being in a wheelchair, and then all of a sudden, it really didn't matter anymore. I need this wheelchair, and if I want to go to any event that requires exercise, I need that wheelchair. And I think that's what helped me get past being embarrassed. I mean, I can either suffer during the event and be completely out of breath the entire time, or I can use my wheelchair and be okay. So I chose the wheelchair. Most of the stories and events that I talk about in this podcast, I have talked in detail about them in a different YouTube video. If you scroll through my channel, you will see many videos already discussing certain topics about my PH. As I finish my timeline of my life with PH, there are some things that I forgot to talk about that I would like to mention now. The first thing is the oxygen. Now, during my story, I told you guys that I needed to sleep with oxygen from the time I was 8 until 13. I was off it for a few years, and then after I stopped taking my sub-Q Remodulin, I went back to needing oxygen, and I needed to wear it at night. So I've been sleeping with oxygen from the age of 18 to present time. I want to talk deeper about my mental health as well, but I'll save that for a different podcast. I just feel it's important to discuss and be open about it, because I'm pretty positive everyone who has a physical illness also suffers from a mental illness. Personally, I suffer from both severe depression and anxiety. Now, I recently started taking pills for my depression, and yes, this has helped with everything going on with my life right now, but I also feel like I'm spiraling down into a deep depression again, and I'm not sure how to handle it. I feel the need to also explain to you guys that so much has happened in my journey so far with PH, and it's hard to remember everything. I wish I had someone recording my journey from the start so you guys could grow up with me and see all my doctor's appointments, see me through all the good and all the bad. What you guys are hearing now is the end stages of pulmonary hypertension. I wish I could share with you guys everything that I went through, but honestly, there's too much and I don't remember a lot of it. So I'd like to point out that all of what I went through was years of progression with PH, and it's just getting worse. I didn't just wake up one day and get to the point I am at now. It took 13 years to be exact. I will try my hardest to share everything with you guys from now on so you guys can see my journey of what living with PH is really like and what you guys can expect from this illness. I also want to consider myself an expert on it, and I think I can help you guys with any of your problems because I've already went through all of it. I have been on all the medications you can be on for PH. I know everyone's story and journey is different, but I'm here to help you guys through it by sharing my story and experiences. I want to end this podcast with a positive note and say to all my PH warriors that I know this illness is hard, and I know this disease takes a lot away from you, and it makes living your best life seem almost impossible. But I want you guys to know that you are not alone, and we are going to fight together. And I want to help inspire young children and even adults to keep fighting and to keep trying. This disease is tough, but it only makes you so much stronger. I believe in every single one of you guys. You are amazing and you got this. I wish nothing but the best for you. We are in this together. So with that being said, this PAH warrior is signing off. Peace.